Welcome to the Gastro Girl podcast. We bring together patients, experts, and health advocates who are all here to help you optimize your health. Here's your host, Jacqueline Garland.
Hello, everyone. Before I begin to tell you about my guests today, I would like to let you know that the topic may be challenging and could be a trigger for anyone who may have an eating disorder. We at Gastro Girl are not afraid to take on the difficult topics, but we also want to respect our listeners and always warn that content you are about to hear may make some people uncomfortable. We are always here to help, and that is why I have invited two amazing women onto the show. Our first guest is patient Addison. She's a 25-year-old actor and virtual assistant to multiple psychologists across the United States. And also joining us is registered dietitian Beth Rosen, who has been essential to Addie's healthcare journey. Welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
us, Jackie.
Oh, this is such an honor. And, like we said, this is a tough topic, but it's an important topic. So we're just going to dive right in. Again, first of all, I want to thank you, Addison, for being here today to discuss this difficult topic that may be a little difficult to open up and share. And your situation is complex and unique because you were diagnosed with gastroparesis before an eating disorder. We know that gastroparesis is a motility issue and has to do with motility in the stomach, and it's not able to work properly. And it can help cause people not to eat, restrict their eating, make eating uncomfortable. And a lot of those things could either help exacerbate a disordered eating. So let's begin. Like, you first had your GI symptoms when you were 12. So can you explain what they were, what you were experiencing? And that's so young.
Yeah, it was very young, and it started out, and this is something that is still very prevalent in my discussions with Beth today, is constipation was the root of all of my issues. It started out with constipation, and I was in sports, so I was seeing trainers and I was doing that whole gamut, and I had a trainer who was restricting my intake, which I now believe led to the constipation at that young age.
At 12, they're restricting your eating at 12.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I can't wait to hear Beth Rosen's take on this.
I know. So, I mean, in the industry I'm in now in acting, you would think, that's common to hear about eating disorders, but you don't expect it in the sports industry because they're always about you gaining muscle. You want to be bigger and faster and stronger. And for me, it was completely different. And I wasn't playing or doing gymnastics or any of those girl sports that, that's a trigger for me because, what's a girl sport?
So
but
what
I
were you?
softball.
Softball.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
So, yes. And so it all started there. And what you said before is really funny, is that my diagnoses being reversed. The entire time, you're right. It was like, okay, I have these functional GI disorders that are leading to this eating disorder. But the whole time it was really the other way around. It was restricting my food intake that was causing all this GI discomfort. And starting with the constipation, I truly believe. I mean, it was always idiopathic. Doctors had no idea what was going on. I only had one doctor pull me aside and say, hey, maybe you should go to this, very expensive eating disorder facility that of course I couldn't afford at the time. Maybe you should do that. And that was just one doctor out of the gamut that I had seen, since I was 12 years old, talking about this stuff.
And this whole time, are you afraid to eat? You're worried what's going to happen, or what were you focused on at this time?
Afraid from all different angles. Afraid that food is going to make me gain weight. Afraid that food is not going to make me feel well. Just in my mind, food was like not a source of energy. It was a source of struggle and pain and confusion, a lot of confusion, because I would have these hunger signals and feel like I couldn't do anything about it.
Oh my goodness. I'm so sorry that you had to go through that. And it only got worse in your teen years. And what happened when you were about 16? Can you share with us what happened then?
Yes. So around 16, 17 years old, I switched over and I started seeing a personal trainer. I had gained some weight, as we all do when we're maturing. And I was insecure about it. And that's also common. But instead of being told it's okay to be insecure about it, but there's nothing wrong, I was led to another trainer. And that trainer, I was their first teenage client. And they decided that they were going to make it their mission to make me their first successful teenage client. So I worked with them and we were mostly just working out. They had me write down all the food that I was eating every day so that they can look at it and tell me what to eat and what not to eat. That's where the MLM brands came in, like Isogenics and
Yeah.
Shakeology. Those all came in as well.
And so they're fixated when you say success, and I want to point this out.
Yeah.
Success in their eyes, was it weight loss, or they were
Weight
trying to make
loss.
you successful in your being an athlete? It was weight loss.
Weight loss, because most of her clientele, this was a trainer that didn't have anything to do with my sport. At this time, my sport days were kind of transitioning over into the theater world, and it was more so just a background hobby that I was doing, playing softball
Right, wow.
during the summers. So this was full on just weight loss. That was her specialty. And she was really excited to get someone of my age because she was expanding her clientele and she had a lot of success in the past with her adult clients. And she felt that it would be the same with me, which the approach should have been totally different since I'm in a growing body still at that age too. You can't.
Now I'm so enthusiastic to get Beth to weigh in, but I want to finish a couple more things with you, and then we're going to have the professional dietitian weighing in here because it's so important. So when were you actually finally diagnosed with gastroparesis? And we're not even talking about an eating disorder yet, right? We're talking about you were diagnosed with gastroparesis. And how did that diagnosis come about?
So that actually came about in college when my restricting got to a point where I began to purge. And the purging was very confusing for me because it felt like stomach discomfort. And the only way to get rid of that sensation was to purge. And so I went to the doctors and I said, I'm throwing up all the time. But I didn't, and Beth was the first one to really solidify the difference between purging and throwing up with me. So I went to the doctor and they did the whole gamut of tests. He didn't believe me. He was the actual first doctor who said, I think this is an eating disorder. But then that all, he started that path, but then that got sideswiped because the last test we did was the gastric emptying test. That was positive. And so he's like, oh no, just kidding. Not an eating disorder, gastroparesis. And it just got more restrictive from there because with the diet with gastroparesis, it is removing a lot of solid foods and things that are good for the digestive tract.
Okay, Beth, I really need you here. This is really disturbing, actually, to have this young woman go through what she went through. And I'm sure that her story is not unique in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think that's the terrible piece about this is, as much as, Addie's story seems like it's unique, it happens all the time because our healthcare providers are not necessarily screening their clients for eating disorders. And a lot of times someone with an eating disorder will present at a GI doctor's office because they're experiencing these functional issues that are known side effects of eating disorders from those who are in the eating disorder world. But if you're not in the eating disorder world, you don't know that up to 98% of folks with an eating disorder will have a functional GI disorder. And so unless they're screening, they won't know.
So I know that there's a connection between the functional and like a gastroparesis, which is a motility issue in the stomach. Can you explain just a little bit, just a high level for our, consumer audience, what is gastroparesis and what's the connection with an eating disorder and how could they go hand in hand and how could it be missed sort of?
Sure. So the stomach is an organ that is actually a muscle. And we know from, exercising, taking breaks from exercise, that when we don't use our muscles, they atrophy or they're just not as strong as they used to be. And our GI system is also that as well. So sometimes with eating disorders, if restriction is taking place, digestion slows as an opportunity for the body to go into survival mode, but also it can impact how the digestion functions. And so the stomach, which is supposed to contract rapidly when there's food in there to help break it down and move it into the small intestines, sometimes doesn't do that job, or does it more slowly now because it's holding on to what it's got, and delayed gastric emptying ensues.
This is so important, and I hope our providers are listening to this too. We're going to get into maybe some of the screening questions that they could ask later on, but I want to understand how Addison came to you. Addie, how did you finally, you got the diagnosis with gastroparesis. Now you're trying to probably more worried about eating. What's going on, and how did your road lead to Beth?
Right. So I got the gastroparesis diagnosis when I was a sophomore in college. So I struggled through about 3 years of it before I finally was like, enough is enough. This is not healthy. I couldn't, once I graduated, it was so hard for me to function in the real world, holding a job and being on any sort of regular schedule. And so I was just desperate, and I did my research and I found Beth's name. I was like, oh my God, she's local. And I reached out right away, and I was in her office the next week.
And so Beth, take us through a patient Addie comes in. What are some of the things that you're asking her to sort of see what's going on, and how were you able to properly identify a possible eating disorder with Addison?
So Addie was completely open with me and shared that she thought she had an eating disorder. She definitely was diagnosed with gastroparesis, but she said the eating disorder was in high school and didn't realize that it had continued. And she was under the assumption that the vomiting that was happening was strictly from the gastroparesis. So we did some talking and working through the dietary intervention for gastroparesis, which is mostly a low-fat, low-fiber diet to start, fork mashable foods, small particle size, so that the stomach doesn't have to work so hard to digest. And for most people, when I have someone who has an eating disorder come into my office and a GI disorder, we treat the eating disorder first. That's the standard. But with Addie, it was easy for me to explain to her the dietary intervention for gastroparesis because it actually expanded her repertoire of food. It gave her the opportunity to say, okay, these foods on this list are going to feel safe. I trust her. She trusted me. And so she could eat more. And then we could look at the foods that she was eating, like popcorn, like ice cream, that were high fat, high fiber, that might have been exacerbating her symptoms, especially when she ate them at night. So she was open to doing some curious observation, as I like to call it, and exploring what foods made her feel good, what foods exacerbated her symptoms. And then as we went on in our time together, we did start to talk about the eating disorder itself and working towards eating regular meals and snacks and getting adequate portion sizes. And Addie did really well with that. She's a rock star.
Yeah. No, and I commend you for being open, because that is probably the most important quality when you're engaging with a healthcare provider, whether it's a doctor like a gastroenterologist or a registered dietitian such as Beth. Mm-hmm. So, I was going to ask about red flags with Addison, but for you, Beth, she was so open. But for patients like Addison who come to you, and they're not as open, and for other providers that are listening, what would be any initial red flags that she comes with a diagnosis of gastroparesis, and I know you're such a rock star dietitian, so you're always right on with those screening questions. What would be some of the red flags, or how would you kind of get to the answers that you need to treat her properly, or a patient properly?
So eating disorder is not just about restricting the food, but it's the relationship to food and thoughts about food and thoughts about body. So in the questions that I ask my clients, I actually have a screening tool that I use when I first meet with somebody. And it's not validated for use with GI patients, but it is a screening tool for eating disorders. And I use that. And there are a couple of them just to give me an idea of what the relationship is with food. Are they competent eaters? Are they disordered eaters? And Addie's relationship with food was not good. She was afraid of it. She was afraid, she had body dysmorphia, which is a belief that there was something different with her body than what she was seeing. And she had a lot of food rules that she followed that were from diet culture that didn't align with the values of being a competent eater, which is what she wanted to do so that she could treat the gastroparesis.
Yeah, and so many people, myself included, have these distorted views of what we should look like, what we should eat. It's so ingrained in our culture, and now even probably more rampant with all of the Instagram and social media and TikTok, that we're supposed to be some sort of way. And it could really be detrimental to young women and young men and even older people like me. You just never know like how that's going to impact you.
So that was one of the things Addie and I did talk about, was curating her feed on social media and asking herself when she saw a post, how it made her feel. Did it make her feel good about herself, or did it make her feel bad about herself? If it made her feel bad about herself, she was to unfollow the account.
I love that idea.
Yeah. And then find people to follow that boosted her up, that made her feel good. Also, people with body diversity, people of all shapes and sizes and abilities. And I think that's helpful too, so that it normalizes what people look like when you see all different kinds of people, rather than what you would normally see in certain magazines or on TikTok or Instagram if you're not curating your feed.
One of the differentiators of your practice, and you're so well known for this, is health at every size. And I want to build on that, as well as what you just said about, curating your Instagram feed. That's so powerful. It sounds so like what, but it makes so much sense. So what other steps did you take together with Addison to really help her understand her eating disorder and how better to manage it?
Well, I think one of the things that I can do as a dietitian is help people understand that food is all on the same emotional playing field. So I won't debate that food has different nutrient densities, which they do, but I don't want someone to think that some foods are good and some foods are bad, because when you think a food is bad, it makes you feel guilty or ashamed. If you think a food is good, it makes you feel maybe more pious or better than other people. And if you don't eat that food, then you feel guilty and shamed. So I wanted to remove all of that and just let food be food, and just learn how to eat and nourish based on what feels good in her body, what doesn't feel good in her body. Also then what she likes and doesn't like, because many of her choices were based on all the different diets that she had been put on as a kid, rather than what does she like to eat.
So that's such a great point. So Addison, when you stepped into Beth's office and you're having these conversations, how did that make you feel? Like, how did that was there a switch that went off? Did you feel finally like someone was listening to you? Explain how you felt when you were visiting with Beth and getting her guidance.
All of the above. I feel like a switch went off every single meeting I had with her. It was like a different one and a different one. And then all of a sudden I was putting all these pieces together and I was eating. And I was like, oh my God, I'm doing it without even realizing. But it really was just, as you said, being open is the only way to truly, when you get everything out there, you are open to changing and recovering. And that's the only way to do it. And I did feel like someone was finally listening to me. I felt like there was someone who wasn't there for the twists and turns, and, because relationships get involved with an eating disorder. And I finally had someone who can just look at it from an outside perspective and say, you are struggling. I am here to help you. And having that was everything. Now,
did you provide Addison with different goals every time you met? And how, it's not easy. What you went through is not easy, I am sure. Yeah. But what were the manageable steps like that you and Beth worked on together? And you can both kind of share the spotlight here on that, because I think it's good to hear both perspectives.
So I'll start and then I'll let you go, Addie. But basically what I did is I met her where she was. So where she was when we first met was, I like to eat popcorn a lot. I like to, I like to snack on these things. And so, so we would have worked on, well, what other snacks do you like? And maybe I moved her towards pretzels, which are low fat, low fiber, so that she would have an easier time digesting this snack that she liked. And, we discussed what kind of snacks she liked, whether it's like, popcorn chips or things like that don't have the fiber that whole popcorn does, because popcorn's a whole grain. And slowly I met her where she was, or she would come and she would say something that was a belief of hers, and I would help her to dispel that belief and explain how it might be different. And eventually she incorporated those beliefs into her values.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I feel like we had a different step, a different challenge every single week that I was to work on. And as a competitive person, that's something that really speaks to me. And I think Beth really understood that if she said, okay, can you try this week? And, it'd be like, okay, I can try that this week. And also almost having a tangible goal as well, where if I can cross that off the list, then I feel accomplished. And taking the morals out of food, as Beth said, the good and bad foods, and making good choices towards recovery was where my new morals lied, rather than bad and good food.
Wow. So, and how are you doing now? And do you still work with Beth? Do you have goals? How's your mindset towards food? And where are you now?
I mean, I retook the gastric emptying test about a year ago, and I'm officially no longer diagnosed with gastroparesis, which feels incredible. Once I got that diagnosis, I thought, okay, I can never eat like a normal person ever again. I'm always going to be restricted. This was my life when I was little, and this is my life forever. And Beth really showed me that wasn't the case. And it feels absolutely amazing. I'm going out to eat with my boyfriend, my grandfather, and all my friends. And it feels really good to order what I want and not worry about being sick, and really truly living life. The eating disorder was something that was always, when I got these GI diagnoses or struggled with the GI stuff, they kind of masked the eating disorder. So like Beth said, I had a feeling that I had an eating disorder in high school. And then once I started having this GI discomfort, that kind of took the front seat and allowed the eating disorder to keep talking almost in the back of my mind, where I didn't even realize that was what was going on. And so now that we've gotten rid of the cover for her, she's there, and I'm like, oh, this is you, and I can hear her clearly, which is better for recovery. But that's the part I'm working on now, is changing those thoughts and changing those beliefs now that I can see them for what they are.
That's such a poignant way to describe that. And I want to point out that not every person with gastroparesis has an eating disorder. This is a very sensitive topic for a lot of gastroparesis patients, and they really do struggle. So for any listener out there, if you're struggling with gastroparesis, or someone who does, we are absolutely not belittling your condition by saying it's an eating disorder. We are just pointing out one case of a young lady who was struggling with an eating disorder, was diagnosed with gastroparesis, and how that connection led her on her patient journey to healing and recovery. So we absolutely want to be totally respectful and sensitive and honor that in this podcast today, because it's not an easy disease or condition for anyone to deal with, whether it's as a result of an eating disorder or it's due to something else, which there are many causes, and they're still doing lots of research and hopefully more on what impacts that. So Beth, one of the really interesting things is that Addie came to you right before COVID, right?
Yes. So I met with her the last week of February, and then 2 weeks later, the world came to a halt. So, because we want continuity of care, Addie, because, she was in her 20s, was tech savvy, and I had already been seeing some clients virtually by that time anyway. So it was an easy transition for us to move to a telehealth platform. And since then, Addie has moved to a different state. And I'm licensed in that state, so I can still practice there. And we continue to be able to see each other this way. It just has made for an easy way to care for clients and have instant contact.
And I mean, it's still effective, right? Addie, you felt like you were getting amazing counsel from Beth. And did you feel that it was effective, even though you weren't able to sit in her office right next to her?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, although I missed seeing her in person, it was still just as effective. Any handouts that she would have given me in person, she could just shoot me an email. So we were also saving the planet. It was just as effective as it was in person. Yeah.
It's true. It's true.
Well, that's great. It speaks to the power of virtual care, which is what we're doing with Gastro Girl, GIOnDEMAND, and the ACG. So it's, I love these little anecdotal stories that really showcase the power of virtual care. Beth and Addison, how can someone continue to be healthy when they have an eating disorder or they're recovering from an eating disorder? And this may be repetitive, but I think it's important to sort of, what are some of the ways that they can do that?
So I think we have to define health for these people who are dealing with an eating disorder, right? Because a lot of times health is equated with size or weight, and that's not the case. We know that people in bigger bodies can be healthy and people in small bodies can be unhealthy, and vice versa. And health is really an internal thing, right? Like blood work and your labs and your colonoscopies and all those things tell us a little bit about your internal health, right? But then health is also part of a bigger picture, which is wellness, right? So you have your physical health, but then there's emotional and spiritual and psychological and all the other pieces in the puzzle of that pie of wellness. And if one has too much focus on it, then we're not really moving towards wellness. And I think that was something that Addie was working on. We had a therapist on our team. They're wonderful. And they worked on the piece with Addie about body image and about total wellness, and really changing Addie's values towards recovery being the goal, and wanting to be in a place in her life where she could go out to eat with friends and family and not fear what she was eating, but also not feel like her eating disorder voice was going to be chatting up a storm when she got home, leading to eating disorder behaviors. So that's, something that we worked on a lot, and she also did with her therapist. And I also want to say that an eating disorder recovery journey is not linear. So there will be times when there are backslides or slip ups, or I could give Addie a goal and it could take months. I mean, there were some things she did right away, but then some things took a lot longer, and we celebrated every little win. And I think that's what's helpful when you have a team that's not only going to advocate for your wellness against your eating disorder voice, but also supports you even when you're not perfect. And there's a lot of perfectionism in eating disorders. So breaking that piece and saying, we're just going to celebrate the little stuff, and this is going to be messy, and we're going to get there. I think that's helpful.
Yeah. So Addison, from your point of view, what are your tips for patients on how to maintain, good health along your journey?
So specifically in recovery, I would say openness and honesty, and that goes along with what Beth was just saying about, meeting someone where they are. If your provider is listening and is compassionate for where you are, recovery is not linear. So those are all very important in order for a patient to feel comfortable opening up and being honest, in order to grow and progress at their own pace. Again, healthy is a relative term to each person. I think a huge focus on mental health is so needed. Even if you don't have an eating disorder, be more compassionate with yourself at every step and stage of your life, because that is the key to happiness, in my opinion, and mental health is compassion and being kind to yourself.
Well, those are very powerful words of wisdom for our listeners. And Beth, I want to ask you, what kind of resources are there for people who may have a GI condition and an eating disorder?
So there is a group that's part of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, Within that group, it's called DIGID. So it's dietitians in gluten and gastrointestinal disorders. And a lot of our DIGID RDs, we create resources for patients. And there's a subgroup of that group, and I'm in that group, and it's for the intersection between GI diseases and eating disorder disease. And then there's also some other things we're working on to help that. But in the meantime, I think there's a big push for healthcare providers in the GI space to start screening their patients for eating disorders.
Yeah, and we actually have a podcast called Eating Disorders and Gastrointestinal Conditions, What You Need to Know. And this was done with gastroenterologist Dr. Monia Whirling. And she shared so much information on eating disorders, GI diseases, elimination diets, common myths around eating disorders, treatments, and more. And I think anyone listening, whether they're a provider or patient, could really benefit from that podcast as well. And I also want to point out, going back to our sensitivity and our acknowledgement of other patient journeys around gastroparesis, we did a very powerful podcast with a patient advocate who's also a patient, a gastroparesis patient, and a doctor. And this is what a patient and a doctor want you to know about gastroparesis. And we feature an inspirational patient, Melissa Adam Van Houten, and her doctor, Baham Moshari. And that episode is, oh my God, it's so powerful. And it really speaks to, you know, gastroparesis patient journey that is not related to an eating disorder. And it is, definitely want to take a listen to that. I also want to point out that there's a National Eating Disorders Helpline, and they have information for 24/7 crisis support. Text NEDA to 741741. And for all others, you can call the toll-free number 1-800-931-2237. And that helpline is open Monday through Thursday, 11 a.m. to 9 p.m. Eastern time, and Friday, 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. And again, if you're in an immediate crisis, you definitely want to call 911. So don't hesitate if you're in a crisis. But ladies, thank you for being here today. This has been phenomenal. Addison, I commend you for not only sharing your story and your journey with us, but for, you know, tackling the tough fight and to not giving up. And Beth, for being there in your unique and very important approach to how you're working with patients like Addie and others. This is amazing. And you're so courageous, both of you. I hope you continue to thrive and excel in your life and in your acting career. This is so powerful and inspirational to share with us. And for our listeners, please don't forget to rate and review us on your favorite podcasting app. And thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you, ladies. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Gastro Girl podcast. For more information and resources, please visit gastrogirl.com. Do you have a question for Gastro Girl? Please email podcast@gastrogirl.com. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in the Gastro Girl podcast are not a substitute for medical advice from your healthcare professional. Please consult a licensed clinician in your state regarding all matters related to your health.